Welcome to our first video on absolute value, number opposites, and integers. Let's begin by reviewing absolute value. Absolute value is a number's distance away from zero. And remember, most importantly, absolute value doesn't care what direction it is from zero. We always express absolute value as a positive number. Okay, remember, absolute value is always going to be expressed as a positive number. Okay, so if we draw a circle or a dot on 0, which is the origin, and let's say I place another point at -3, okay, then I would know that my absolute value of -3 is the distance from 0 on the number line. And I can see that that's 1, 2, 3 units away from 0 on the number line. So the absolute value of -3 is 3. The absolute value of +5 is simply going to be the distance from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of -3 is 3. Now we have a special symbol for absolute value, and that symbol is the double bar. Anything within this double bar is going to be positive. The double bar stands for absolute value. So if you were asked to tell me the absolute value of -3, you can look on your number line and see that -3 is 3 units away from 0. So we just say the absolute value of -3 equals 3. The same we can do for the absolute value of 5. We have double bars with the 5 inside. The absolute value of 5 is just 5. Remember, absolute value is always positive. Let's look at a few examples of absolute value. If you have a negative sign within the absolute value bars, so for example, if we have the absolute value of -4, we see that that's going to equal 4. And we can see that by placing a point at -4 and then using the scoop method. We're going to see how many units that is from 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the absolute value of -4 is just plain old 4. Now, there are going to be questions that look like this. The absolute value of 4, so there's a +4 inside our double bars for absolute value, but there could be a negative outside of the bar. If your negative is outside of the bar, then the question is going to be answered with a negative answer, -4. So even though the absolute value of 4 is +4, since my negative sign is outside the absolute value, that's going to make my answer -4. So be sure to correctly look at where your negative sign is. If your negative sign is like this one and it's within the bar, you always know that absolute value is positive. If your negative sign is outside the bar, like this example, then your absolute value is going to take on the negative sign. What are number opposites? Well, number opposites are important because they're going to help us understand the definition of an integer. A number opposite is a number that is the same distance away from 0 on the number line. So if we look at, let's say we look at -4 and +4. We know that +4 is 4 units away from 0 on the number line. We also know that -4 is also 4 units away from 0 on the number line. So because the absolute value of -4, which equals 4, is equal to the absolute value of +4, which is also 4, we can say that -4 and 4 are called number opposites. Okay, they are called number opposites. We can also call these numbers, these pairs of numbers, zero pairs. And that is because when you add two number opposites together, such as 4 plus -4, they're always going to add to 0. So you might see the word number opposite, or you might see the word zero pair. Just know that they mean the same thing. Now we're going to get to the most important slide. It's the definition of an integer. So we're going to start off by saying that an integer is a whole number and its opposite. Now remember that a whole number is not a fraction and it's not a decimal. It has to be expressed as a whole number. So remember that whole numbers look like 1, 2, 3, so on and so on. Okay? So we can't have something like 1/2. Okay? That is not an integer. Okay? Integers also include 0. So that's very important. 0 is an integer. Okay? The other important term is opposite. So it's a whole number and its opposite. So if we were looking at our example of +1, +2, and +3, then we also know that -1, -2, and -3 are also integers because those three numbers are the opposite, the number opposites of the positive integers 1, 2, and 3. So the reason I'm keying in on this term opposite is because now we're including negative numbers as integers. Okay? Now I just want to remind you, an integer cannot be a fraction or a decimal. But look carefully when you're given a fraction. If you're given a fraction that looks like this, 6/2, well, I'm always going to look to simplify any fraction that I'm given. So I know if I simplify 6/2, I'm going to get 3. And I know that 3 is an integer. So be careful when you're given a fraction and make sure if you see that it's an improper fraction, you see that your numerator is greater than your denominator, just make sure that it doesn't simplify to a whole number.